This is episode 72 of the Christian Travelers Network. Today, we will be talking about allergic reaction travel testimonies with Jenna Erlandson. Welcome to the Christian Travelers Network, where travel stories, community, and scripture combine. Hey Christian travelers, I'm so glad that you are here because today we have a very interesting story. Jenna Erlandson is going to be talking about something a little scary and unexpected that happened in Scotland and how God worked through that. But before we dive into that, I want to once again point you to our website, christiantravelers.net. There we have a bunch of faith and travel resources. We are going to officially be starting booking trips here in the next 2 months, so be on the lookout for that. And you can also find links to our Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest as well. But without further ado, Jenna Erlandson is the host of Bridge of the Faithful podcast, where she explores and defines what faithfully actually means and what it looks like in real life. She's also a pastor's wife, mom to 3 small, amazing, and rambunctious children, and also works as an oncology nurse where she meets the most amazing people. Hey Jenna, how are you doing?
Good. And I kind of want to know more about booking a trip. That sounds amazing right now.
Yes, it might look a little different than normal. We're actually excited to be offering some kind of like get away with your family kind of weekend things that we'll start off with, and then things will expand once COVID dies out, but very excited.
Yes, that's awesome.
So, you have had the opportunity to travel a little bit yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your experiences?
I've had some really cool. Europe is pretty much where my heart lives. I don't know if it's because I have a lot of European heritage in my family or what, but I just adore all of European culture. So I've been to Germany and Austria, which Austria at Christmas time is pretty magical. And I've been to Scotland, which you'll hear more about. And then I've done things closer to home, like Colorado Springs or LA, or I guess Hawaii isn't really that much closer to home. It's just, but it's still the
Yeah.
US. But yeah, I've done a little bit of this and that travels.
Have a lot of those been mission trips or just kind of more vacations or?
Most of them have been vacations.
That's awesome. But tonight we're going to kind of focus on your trip to Scotland. Why did you go there in the first place?
So I went to a little college called Cedarville University. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's in
Mm-mm.
it's a Baptist college in the middle of the cornfields of Ohio.
Oh, okay. Very
And
nice.
yeah, and I sing, so I was in their chorale, which is I don't know why they picked chorale versus choir, but there's something different about a chorale versus a choir. I'm not sure. So I was in their chorale, and we went to Scotland and toured and did concerts.
Ooh, very nice. How long were you guys over there?
Oh, I think it was about a week. It was over Easter, probably about 7 days. I feel like if you're going somewhere where you're gonna have so much jet lag, you need to
Mm,
at least get a weekend to make it worth the time.
absolutely. And so what were some of the fun things that you guys did? Obviously, you got to sing. Were there any unique places that you sang at?
You know, it's funny. I don't know if the event that we'll talk about later affected my memory. There's not a lot of like specific singing that I remember,
Uh-huh.
but I remember other events. Like obviously we went to see Loch Ness and um, hiking. That was probably the most beautiful hiking experiences I've had, both in the forest and then on something called King Arthur's Seat, where apparently King Arthur rode with his knights all the time. And
Oh,
it was you hike up this hill, probably mountain, I don't know. I just remember it was almost like being in a movie, just seeing the scenes around me as I get up to the top of this King Arthur's Seat hill. And it was so windy, it was like literally pulling the snot out of my nose. It's like, I was like, this is so beautiful. I don't know if it's the wind or if I'm crying or what is happening here, but it was a really cool experience.
Oh, goodness. Sounds like the view might have been a little bit better then.
Yes, it was great.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. But you had like an incredibly memorable moment um in Scotland, something you didn't really anticipate happening. You want to tell us kind of a little bit about that story?
Sure. So there was a night, somewhere we had times where we were in the city and there were times where we were more in a rural area, and this was a city night. I don't remember which city it was,
Mhm.
but we went out to eat and it was different food than normal. And probably about an hour after, I started having an allergic reaction, which we later found out was to shellfish that I didn't know I had. Apparently, you can develop shellfish allergies when you're 18, which is terrible because then you know
Oh,
you like it, but then you can't ever have it again.
oh,
Um, but yeah, so I remember sitting, probably 20 of my choir friends, we were sitting in a room, and all of the sudden, I just was really itchy. And I looked down. I must have gone into the bathroom because I know I didn't do this in front of a bunch of people, but I pulled my shirt up and there was like hives everywhere.
oh,
And then my face started feeling funny. And one of the people we were traveling with was an EMT. And he's like, "Your face has just doubled in size." And my lips were huge. My tongue was huge. I could barely breathe and I was itchy. And I was a nursing student at the time. So I knew, okay, well, I don't have an EpiPen, but I do have Benadryl. So I like doubled the amount of normal Benadryl. Don't do this in real life, but if you have nothing else to do, I guess doubling Benadryl. So I doubled the Benadryl and I could breathe a little bit more. And then we were trying to figure out, what do you do? Because at this time, I don't, they don't really have a 911. Now they do. It's like 999. But at the time we were there, it was this really long number that nobody knew, like
oh
nobody
my
had
gosh.
memorized. Um, And then in Scotland, they just have really thick accents. So I was used to the Scottish accent. My youth pastor in high school was from Scotland, so I was kind of used to it.
Mhm.
But he had been Americanized, so it wasn't quite so thick. And when you're doped up on Benadryl and trying to listen to these people with an accent that you don't really understand, it's just everybody's in chaos. And the um my choir director was just, I could tell he was inwardly panicking because nobody knew what to do. Um, So we didn't get an ambulance, and it was too late at this point because the I'm sure ambulances still work. And anyone from Scotland, obviously I'm butchering the culture and how things work because I had no idea what was happening. But nobody knew, like even when we called the front desk, they didn't know how to call for an ambulance, which
Really?
is still weird to me. But
Yeah. Oh my
um
gosh.
so they ended up calling a taxi,
Mhm.
and we had um a Czech tour guide touring Scotland with this choir, and then a Scottish taxi driver, and then I had two friends come with me to help me not be alone.
Yeah.
And we were all traveling in this taxi to go to a Scottish hospital. And in the middle of all of this, because I was so doped up on Benadryl, the only language that I could speak, I could understand English, but the only language I was able to speak was German. It was just a very weird situation.
Yeah. So how do you know German in the first place?
I learned it in high school through
Mhm.
normal high school stuff, but I've always loved languages and how they function and how they sound, and it just seems so romantic. And selfishly, I like knowing something other people don't. So if I want to have a conversation with someone and people don't know what I'm saying, I can do that. And I was dating my now husband, and he also spoke German. So we
Oh.
practiced a lot, and we still speak it today. So it's still something we know and practice.
So you were speaking German in a taxi. How did this like play out?
Well, my friends did not speak German, so they were clueless to the whole thing. I kept remember them looking at each other and being like, "What is going on?" But the Czech tour guide spoke German, and
Mhm.
the Scottish taxi driver spoke German. And I think they were trying to keep me calm, so they just kept asking me things. And my husband was, or boyfriend at the time, but husband now, was getting ready to do an internship in Berlin. So they started asking me questions like, how do you, like you, how do you even know German? What's this American girl doing speaking German in a Scottish taxi? and it just led to a conversation about, well, my boyfriend is going to be a youth ministries um internship at a church in Berlin. And so that we were talking about how the taxi driver goes to Berlin all the time because he has friends there, and just talking about Jesus, and he had questions about Jesus. And honestly, like I don't know if it just switched something in my brain, because I do know all of these German words, but in a typical situation, I don't think I could go this depth of a conversation in German, especially at 18.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool because I remember we were talking about Thanksgiving and um, what that means to me as a Christian, and food and church, and what's the difference between denominate, like, it was a really deep conversation, and I remember he was just really curious and really hungry for knowledge about it.
Yeah. So, when you finally got there, like wrapping up that conversation and then like walking into a hospital there, like what happened, I guess?
So it was a really nice ending to the conversation. There was like not prayer or anything, but it was kind of like a mutual, we'll think, like, we'll never forget this conversation. Like, I'll never forget this man. And I pray for him a lot, even though I don't even know what his name is. But just praying for him, and whatever journey he went from there, because that obviously was God calling him.
Mhm.
Um, Reminder that God's out there, whether you're in Berlin or Scotland, and there's an opportunity for him to connect with God either way. So I pray for him a lot, just for whatever came from that. Um, But apparently when you go to a Scottish hospital, you have to have, um, an appointment.
Oh.
So, um, so we get to the emergency room, and I remember it was this epic looking hospital with brick and, um, just the really cool architecture of older Europe. So I'm not sure how old this hospital was, but I remember getting there and nobody knew how to get in, and I'm sitting here. I was feeling a lot better at the time because the Benadryl really kicked in and did its job. Um, so then it was kind of comical of like, what do we do now? We're here at the hospital, our taxi's gone, but we don't know how to get in, and you need an appointment. So finally, we found this like doorbell buzzer thing and told
Uh-huh.
them there was someone having an allergic reaction outside. So they sent me in, and I sat in the waiting room, and I remember otherwise it seemed pretty similar to an emergency room here in the States. Um, they finally got me in, and by this time I was speaking English again, so that was helpful. Um,
Yeah.
and I didn't have the hives anymore because the Benadryl was working and I was breathing fine. And but I also get kidney stones, and I was passing a kidney stone at the time. So when they that's another fun story, but it wasn't a big deal. I passed enough that it wasn't a problem. But they make you, you know how you like pee in a cup and American stuff, they pee in a box.
Oh.
So they gave me this box, and I'm like, what do I do with this? And so I went and peed in a box, and it had some signs of infection and things. So then they were worried about appendicitis. So I almost got my appendix out in Scotland. So that would have been a whole other story. But they learned that it was just a kidney stone, and I was
Oh,
doing fine. The allergy, I wasn't having any more allergic reaction stuff. So then I went back to the hotel, and we went on our merry way for the rest of the trip.
oh my goodness. That is one heck of a story, and I bet the emotions were high throughout the whole thing.
Scared. I was never actually like scared I was gonna die,
Mhm.
but it was actually me more calming other people down because
Yeah.
nobody knew what to do. But that's just my personality anyway. It's like, it's okay. You're gonna be fine. I may be dying, but you're gonna be okay. Don't worry.
Oh my goodness. And I bet like that had to be an even more heightened experience for the taxi driver. Like you're having an allergic reaction and yet you're witnessing and absolutely calm in the backseat.
speaking German.
Yep, yep, yep. Oh my goodness. So, kind of coming out of this experience, like, what would you say is kind of like one of the biggest takeaways for you, like a lesson learned?
One of them is I've always been afraid. This isn't really travel related, but I've always been afraid of not knowing what to say when it
Mhm.
comes to a situation where I can witness, and just being afraid that I'm going to step in the way and mess it all up. And in this situation, I literally had to give everything up. And like my tongue, I couldn't speak English anymore, a language that is my second language. And yeah, I'm okay at it, but definitely not when the one that I would purposely go in and like, let's have this deep conversation in a language that I wouldn't qualify myself fluent in.
Yeah,
And God was able to like strip everything away that I take confidence in myself and use me as a tool in a language that's not even my own. I would not call this speaking in tongues because I do know German, but where he like loosed something in my mind and used my tongue in a way that I would never have been able to do if I were in my full control. And he
yeah,
showed me that he can use me as a tool and he can give me the words no matter what situation I'm in. And that gives me now, I have a lot more confidence in almost letting my confidence go away, if that makes any sense. Like I am confident and feel like I can trust God to use me and my tongue, and that he can use me despite the fact that I get in the way sometimes.
absolutely. It's such a like I feel like that's something a lot of us can relate to. That struggle with like, oh, I'd love to tell you my story, but I don't know if I can really like will I have the right words and yeah, that's a true testimony of how God has changed or how God used you in such a weird situation and that's so awesome to hear how he has changed just your mindset with that following that. What would you say is something like from this experience that you would encourage others to maybe consider in their travel or in their faith lives?
For travel, I would say it's a testament that God's with us no matter where we're going. When you leave the comforts of the country or the culture that you're used to, doesn't mean that God's leaving you.
Mm,
And he might even show himself in ways that he you wouldn't normally be open to if you were at home.
yeah,
So I've always loved how God shows up in and shows more of himself through other cultures, through other situations, through things where we don't feel safe. And the only way we can know we're safe is because we're with God and that he's with us and we don't leave him behind when we travel. So if people are afraid of leaving their culture or being unconfident in a new area, that if God's calling you to go there, he's going to give you the words and the the language even, um to do with you if you allow him to use you as a tool and to really give you, that's a really cool story. That's a really cool thing that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life because God was with me and I allowed myself to see him in all situations, whether they're scary or beautiful. You know, whether I'm on top of that beautiful hill seeing the awesome scene with snot coming out my nose or if I'm in a taxi swollen twice my normal size and not speaking my own language. God was there the whole time in both situations. Those are both situations where I have seen different facets of the one whole God and different parts of him and understand his character a little bit more.
absolutely. I feel like travel allows us to step out of our normal and allows us oftentimes to trust him because there are things that don't go as planned, whether it's an allergic reaction or just getting to see a gorgeous view that you weren't expecting or whatever else comes our way. And there's opportunities for us to do that at home and when we travel abroad. So,
Yes.
yeah.
But outside of your time in Scotland, you also have experienced some kind of scary situations where God has really shown himself to you. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those experiences?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of travel. No wonder my mom was afraid to let me travel sometimes when I tell her all these stories of things that happened to me. Um, well, there's like just annoying nuances of when I went to Germany in high school. And this was before cell phones and understanding like all of that stuff that makes me feel old. But it was right before cell phones. Like the year after I went to Germany is when cell phones came around. But they lost my luggage for 3 days.
Ooh.
And I was the only one there without family. Everybody else had someone around. So I was like trying to navigate figuring out like what do I do without clothes for 3 days and stuff like that.
Oh.
And God showed me a lot about depending on him there and how I don't need all the things that he will supply my needs through
Mm.
that. So we survived that. And another one is it doesn't necessarily well, it impacts me, but it wasn't necessarily my story. But when my husband's family is originally from Chicago area, and every year we have a pilgrimage to Wrigley Field to see them play, except for
Mm.
this year because COVID sucks. And
Yeah.
um, but this was, I think, 4 years ago. It was a long time ago. Well, 4 years isn't really that long, but it feels like a long time. But we went with my husband's family, which included my sister-in-law, my husband's brother's wife, and her dad came. And I remember we were at the game, and the first thing that happened was my mother-in-law started choking on a hot dog, and that was the first time I've ever had to do the Heimlich. Like, not
Oh.
at work at the hospital where, where you would expect to, but at a baseball game for my mother-in-law. So there was that. And then right after that, my sister-in-law's father fell and broke his kneecap.
Oh.
And then he's one of those stoic veterans that refuses to admit that he's in pain. So he sat in his seat the whole time until the end of the game. And then when it was time to leave, he stood up and fell again and cracked it some more. And so they ended up taking him to the hospital, and my sister-in-law went. And while they were in the ER room with the doctor in the room, so like of all the times, this is just a crazy God timing. So the doctor was in seeing Sarah's dad, and he looks over at Sarah and realizes that she's having a seizure to find out that she has a brain tumor.
Oh.
So this was all a crazy day of traveling. But at the same time, looking at this whole thing of God's timing, if not that I'm thankful for broken kneecaps, but God was there when Brian, his name is Brian, when Brian fell and knew that the timing of this knee break would take them to the ER, and Sarah would, it just happened to be when the doctor was in the room that Sarah would have a seizure. And that's
Yeah.
the only way they would have found this brain tumor until things got way worse. So
Wow.
all of the God timing of that was another crazy, hard, scary situation. But all through that, you see God weaved. Like my mother in law choked on a hot dog, but her nurse daughter in law just happened to be 2 rows in front of her and literally ran over people to get to her. Like all this timing. God is always there when it's scary. He's going to provide, He's going to be there to keep us safe. He's always paying attention, and He loves us so much.
Amen. Man, there have been a lot of interesting instances in your life, and they all seem to be health related,
Yeah.
that God has really shown up for you and your family. Yeah. Um, one of the questions that I always love to ask our guests is what has been the biggest God moment in all of your travels? You've shared some amazing ones, but do you have any in particular that you would like to add?
I do. I've been praying about this for a couple of days to see like what God wanted me to share. And this is a story. It's very personal. Um, but it's been a huge change of our life. And it happened on May 23rd, 2013. And we were going to LA. And my husband had just gotten, so I told you before, he was a youth ministry major in college, and did his internship in Berlin.
Mm.
When we graduated, we decided we're like barely older than high schoolers. We did not feel mature enough to shepherd them or be in charge of them. So he did other things and then got a degree in computer animation. And one of the things about having a degree in computer animation is you can't live in the middle of cornfields of Ohio and get a job.
Yeah.
So we were checking out LA. My brother lives there. So we were going to go visit him, see if we loved it, hated it, were okay with it, to make a big move out that way and see if that's where God was taking us next with Josh's career. So we sat in the airport before we left, and we knew this was a big trip and that something was going to happen. We were going to make a decision. Okay, we're ready to move out to LA, which was for me terrifying, and exciting at the same time. And just figure out what's next in our life. So we sat in the airport before boarding. We prayed, and I remember what we said. We didn't say like help us decide if LA is where we're going to go. It was help us decide if now's the time for my husband to leave his job and move for something else. So we prayed that prayer, all excited, God's going to do something cool. We get to LA, and literally 5 hours later, out of nowhere, my husband got a call that his job was just gone.
What?
Yeah. So we're like, "Okay, God, that was a little more direct than than what we were expecting." But at the same time, thank you, God, for just making it easy. We didn't have to think about it. He just made it like we asked him, "Make it really clear." And God said, "Okay, bye job. It's gone." Um and it was kind of nice that we were on vacation when that happened, because then we could really just enjoy the vacation and not have to worry about, getting back in time or what's waiting for me at work. We did have to figure out what are we going to do about insurance and stuff like that. But then we thought, hey, this is God telling us, yeah, it's time to move on. Let's move to LA. Let's check out some stuff. Let's make some phone calls. And at the same time, we were dealing with a 3-year journey of infertility.
Mm,
And for me, that was just a huge identity crisis of just comparison and like, why, God, did you design me as a woman to have babies and then not give me the ability to have them? All of this inner dialogue with God and anger and things. And I had finally kind of started turning a corner and thinking, okay, well, that means we get to adventure in different ways in our life. And then also we've got my identity crisis, and now my husband's lost his job and his ability to provide for our family. So there's an identity crisis in the middle of that. And so that was the trajectory that led us to we can go like the next 6 years of that literally took us off the path we were going into something new.
mm.
And 2 weeks later we found out we were 9 weeks pregnant, so we decided not to move to LA in the middle of all of that stuff. But that was probably the biggest God moment of like, hey, you asked me to be specific. I'm going to be specific, and I'm going to take you on this incredible journey and show you that, I'm the one that provides for you. I'm the one that gives you an identity. I'm the one that decides when you're ready to have a baby. I'm the one that makes you fulfilled, not a family. That was probably the biggest God moment of my life, is just that letting go, and God totally showing us, I've got I've got your adventure, your journey, your traveling planned.
What a wonderful story. And it's so awesome to hear that God works so many things out just in such beautiful timing and very directly.
Yes. Sometimes I need direct and blunt. I
Yes.
overthink too much.
Oh, me too. I feel like I've sat on this. I've been doing this podcast for over a year now, and I've been sitting on, do we like expand to more things like offering trips? And you know what? God's kind of been pushing some doors around and just keep saying it's time, and can't keep sitting on the fence forever. So,
Yep.
yeah. So, did you guys end up staying where you were at? Or did you guys choose to find like a totally different location?
It kind of depends on the timeline that you're looking at here. So that sent us into, okay, no job, so we got to figure something out. We're pregnant, we're having a baby. We've got to
Yeah.
do this. So I switched to full time in the job that I was in before. I was not working full time, and now I went full time so that we could have insurance while having a baby and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And my husband did some freelancing. He had been doing video um production, and So he did some freelance in that and then took a job at a church as a tech director and then learned a little bit more about what he needs to feel like he can thrive. So the church was not a bad place and it was not a bad job, but he just needed more interaction with people.
Mm.
So he ended, here's more to the cool timing of stuff, but he actually ended up going back to, he was working for Cedarville University. He went back to work for them for something completely different. He was a techie guy, as you learned. He's the techie man, and he codes. So he went and he became a web developer for the university. He got the call that he got that job literally 3 minutes after the baby was born.
What?
so so we're still in the same area. He goes back to the same company, I guess you would say, different job. And that led him, we had to switch churches because he had gotten that tech director job at a church, and then when we left, we decided it was time to go somewhere else. Not that, again, the church was a great church, but we needed to go somewhere different.
Oh.
And the church that we ended up landing at helped my husband realize, I need to rededicate my life. I've taken too much control. I need to get back with God. Led us through a journey of, okay, he went back and is like, I have this Bible degree, this ministry degree. I feel like God's calling me to go into full-time ministry now. This was like 4 years later.
Wow.
And the whole crazy story is so God kind of called Josh back to him, prepared us for a life of full-time ministry. We waited for another 3 years. So it was almost the same time of the infertility thing. I waited for 3 years from when we heard God say, okay, it's time for you to start looking for full-time ministry, until God said, okay, my place is ready for you that I want you to go. And so he was in the middle of two job interviews. One was as a professor in um, kind of the communications degree
Mhm.
area, and the other was as a discipleship pastor in a church it ended up being like an hour away from where we were, so it wasn't really that big of a move. But the day he was supposed to go, this is so funny, the day that he was supposed to go to the interview for the professor job, uh, the day before, we prayed, God, okay, make it clear if you want us to go to the church or if you want us to go to the professor job, because we just weren't clear. And we wanted him to be clear, and how we prayed last time, be clear. And the the night, like in the middle of the night or the morning, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning of the day he was supposed to go interview at the university for the professorship job, my water broke with our third child. And he never made it to the interview. It was
Oh
2 weeks
my
early. It was not expected. We purposely planned these interviews to be like 2 weeks before.
god. Mhm.
But nope, God said, nope, your water's gonna break. You're not gonna make it to that interview. I want you to go to this church. And so God brought Josh to this church that we're at now as a discipleship pastor, one that does web development and produces like freelance video production in the middle of COVID. So he was able to get the church ready to do church online.
Absolutely.
And he's used his gifts in other really cool ways that just, looking back, but all the stuff that we're at now, I can point back to that time we sat in the airport on May 23rd, 2013, and said, God, just make it clear where you want us to go.
That gives me goosebumps. Oh, wow. God is so good and
Yes.
his timing is just amazing.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, Jenna, we have absolutely loved hearing your stories of how God has worked in some incredible ways through some scary health situations and then just like moving your life and your husband and your family in some amazing directions as well. How can our listeners connect with you outside of this podcast?
So I have a podcast myself that kind of chronicles what is faithfulness. I've been through a lot of weird situations and seen God's faithfulness, and I've also seen where I needed to step out in my own faithfulness to follow. My podcast, like you said, is called Bridge of the Faithful, which your travelers might like. I've based the title off of the Incan rope bridges in Peru. If you Here's more story. You want more story?
Yes, please.
So, um, the title came to me in a weird nerdy way because God knows I'm a nerd. And I sing obviously because I was in chorale in Scotland, but I also do worship team at this church that we were at before, the one that we're at now. And he sent me a text and it came in the wrong order. And God was already working in my heart. I want you to chronicle this journey with me of faithfulness. And all of the sudden, I got these texts that were in a weird order, and it said, the bridge to the faithful. And I changed it a little bit, bridge of the faithful, just to make it sound a little better. But it put in my mind this rope bridge, and I did some research, and I really someday want to go to South America and check out these bridges. I don't know if I'd be brave. I have to be brave enough to get on them if they're safe enough to get on, because I just feel like that would be weird if I didn't do that after all of this research that I've done. But the way that the Incans made these rope bridges is they tied them together. They wove grass basically together and made them really incredibly strong. And then they would go on one side, they would nail them in. So nailing them in kind of reminds me of Jesus being nailed to the cross. And they would go down in the chasm, and they would traverse, if this was a single person. So imagine Jesus nailing one end of the bridge in, going into this chasm full of dangerous creatures, not tigers because it's South America, jaguars, and um, journeying to the other side, climbing up, and then nailing the other side in. And to me, that was a picture of Jesus like traveling this dangerous chasm that typically people cannot survive going across, making an easy path to go over, connecting two sides. So connecting me to Jesus with this bridge that he wove together and then carried across himself and nailed into the ground. And my job is to step on the bridge. I can see the bridge and think it's really cool, and I can believe that the bridge works, but I need to step on it.
Yeah.
So that to me is the faithfulness on my end. God's faithfulness does not depend on me stepping on the bridge. God's bridge is there. It doesn't depend on me, but me crossing the bridge, I have to commit to him by stepping on it. So that's the word picture of the bridge of the faithful, is those bridges down in South America. And so my podcast focuses on, okay, what does God's faithfulness look like? Not in the Christianese, but what does that really mean? How does that apply to me? What is my responsibility? And what amazing things can God show us that we can trust him and journey with him across the bridge?
I will definitely be putting links into the description below and be following your podcast as well. Um, Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. We have really appreciated it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Christian travelers, I hope that you will give Jenna a follow as well. And until next time, safe travels and God bless.